Despite the odds being against them, Infinity Ward managed to get Modern Warfare 3 out the door to both good sales and critical reception. While it didn't quite live up to the previous 2 entries in the series, it was a satisfying ending that capped off a very influential trilogy of games. While Treyarch worked on plotting Call of Duty forward toward the future, literally, it was time for Infinity Ward to get back to work and start their next project. However, that ended up being a problem. After so many of the key creative talent that helped shape COD 4 and Modern Warfare 2 left at the start or in the middle of Modern Warfare 3's development, Infinity Ward was left without an identity. This is why I believe a lot of the big decisions on Modern Warfare 3 had been made before many of the major shakeups. While it didn't innovate in too many areas in the campaign, Spec Ops and multiplayer both had their fair share of changes and evolutions. Spec Ops missions became more involved, and a wave-based survival mode was added for endless replayability. On the multiplayer front, Modern Warfare 3 was the first Call of Duty game to move away from kill streaks since their introduction and introduced an optional score streak system with its own set of rewards. Following this, score streaks ended up becoming the standard for years to come. However, Sledgehammer Games is usually given credit for Modern Warfare 3's multiplayer, so can Infinity Ward really even take credit for that evolution? And that's the crux of the problem moving forward. Not only was Infinity Ward moving forward with a game set to release in 2013 without any input from the studio's original leadership, but it was also the dawn of a new console generation. This meant that not only did they have to make the game for PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Wii U, they also had to make it for the new PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. That's 2 additional SKUs to work on, not to mention the PS4 hardware was vastly different compared to the PS3's notoriously hard to work on cell processor. So putting some of this into perspective might help answer why they made some of the decisions they made. First off, most of the marketing around the game revolved around the new technology they were working with, thanks to new consoles. This didn't exactly go the way they were hoping, and the new AI tech and dog models ended up being memed into oblivion.
We've added fluid dynamics, interactive smoke, and also added an AI system to it. So we have fish move out of the way when you get close to them.
We have fish too.
The back of the box for Battlefield 4 even has a quote from IGN directly calling out this title. Talk about fighting words. So even right up until launch, things weren't looking as good as usual, as Treyarch at this point in time was evolving the franchise a little faster with their Black Ops games than Infinity Ward was. But internet memes and smack talk in the back of a rival's game wouldn't mean much if they delivered a stellar game. So did they? Well, you probably know the answer to that already. Often regarded as one of the worst games in franchise history, Call of Duty Ghosts is doomed to forever be a punchline, and for good reason. While Modern Warfare 3 may have been salvaged thanks to the work that had been done before the rats fled the sinking ship, those that remained couldn't keep what was left of the studio afloat with this new game. While they've since recovered from this low point, this game will always be a ghost that looms over the studio and haunts them forever. Now to start things off, I don't think that the premise is entirely flawed. They just didn't take the concept far enough to really make anything feel new. In fact, on the heels of the Modern Warfare trilogy, the core concept of the game is a good mix of new while being rooted in the familiar. After Ghost from Modern Warfare 2 became such a standout character thanks to the mysterious nature of his past, familiar voice, and iconic design, basing an entire game around a bunch of cool, mysterious Special Forces operators that wear skull masks is a cool idea. While Infinity Ward made clear pretty quickly that this was separate from Modern Warfare, the familiar elements being expanded on in a new setting was actually exciting in the pre-release phase. So going into this for the first time in 2013, I was pretty excited to learn about who these guys were. So the game opens with narration that explains that the Ghosts are an elite unit of fighters that were the sole survivors of a massive battle that thinned their numbers from 60 to only a dozen or so. These men that survived ended up fighting through all their ammunition and melee weapons until they used their bare hands in shocking and elusive ways that the only survivor from the opposing force could only describe them as ghosts. It's a decent enough backstory, but that's really all it ever is. We end up meeting several of the characters that had to have participated in the battle later, but they never really seem like the super soldiers they're made out to be. Keep this in the back of your mind, and we'll circle back around to that later. So after we get our backstory, we meet the Walker family. There's the father, Elias, and his 2 sons, Logan and Hesh. Players take on the role of Logan, our silent protagonist. While out for a hike, Elias tells his sons about the ghosts, but Hesh seems skeptical about the whole thing. But before the game allows us to get too attached to these characters, we switch to space. Before we can get attached to these characters, the space station is attacked by an enemy known only as the Federation. We'll get to them in a moment, but what's important now is that they're shooting at us, so we need to shoot back. They want a device known as Odin, which is a super weapon straight out of Ronald Reagan's playbook. How exactly does it work? Well, first,
there are 7 Zeus satellites orbiting Earth. Each satellite contains 10 hollow platinum tubes filled with a tungsten rod. Now, to direct a rod to its target, we don't launch it or fire it.
We
Drop it.
The rod touches down 8 times faster than a bullet, and with a force significantly greater than a nuclear warhead. None of the fallout. All of the fun.
Okay, that was weird. Some clips from G.I. Joe Retaliation somehow got into this video. I don't know how that was relevant at all, but hopefully nothing like that happens again in this video. Anyway, the Federation begins dropping tungsten rods all around the US, decimating major cities and strategic locations. Our 2 might-as-well-be unnamed astronauts manage to destroy Odin and burn up in the atmosphere. Back on the ground, though, the Walker family is forced to bear witness as San Diego is destroyed. They manage to get to safety, and a long, brutal 10 years is skipped over entirely to when the war against the Federation is at a stalemate. So, who are these guys, anyway? Well, evidently they're a big conglomeration of countries that come together under one umbrella in South America when they got rich and powerful by selling their oil reserves to other nations, and presumably then attacking and taking over said nation because no other major world power is mentioned in this game other than the US and the Federation. So with the war at a stalemate, people are basically living in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Maybe. One thing the game doesn't do a good job on is world building. We don't really know what the situation is like in other areas of the country. Given that California is a border state, it's understandable that it's probably a high conflict area. What about Idaho, though? Maine? A list of major US cities is listed off when the Federation nukes them from orbit, but states are more than just major metropolises. Are people living in Wyoming even aware of any problems with the Federation if they're just living off the land and raising cattle with their neighbors? We're not given a whole picture of how this invasion has affected the country, nor are we given a reason as to why the Federation wants to destroy the US. I mean, there's a very long list of reasons why another country would maybe want to have beef with America, but the Federation's is left as fill in the blank. Because of this, they never come off as a frightening enemy or respected like previous hostile forces in the Modern Warfare games. And since the rest of the world is never mentioned, we don't even get to use the cliche world domination excuse. But hey, it's just Call of Duty where you shut your brain off and shoot stuff, right? So anyway, Hesh and Logan help fend off attacks from the Federation across the Santa Monica checkpoint until Captain Dad tells them that they have to go into no man's land to retrieve special intel. This brings us to Riley, who is the focus of lots of the marketing. One thing I'll give this game is that I do enjoy the exploration of soldiers and their dogs here. Previous games simply use attack dogs as an enemy that need to be shot, but here they at least do a little bit to show you how they operate on downtime and actually have a bond. Plus, they show that the dogs can be used for more than just attacking, as Riley is instrumental in getting the intel the boys were after. It goes a long way to show that Riley isn't just another piece of equipment like a drone, he's a part of the squad, and you get that sense very quickly. Also, you get to pet him, so, points in my book for that. After the intel's collected, our team runs into a little trouble as they become surrounded by wolves. Just when it appears that they're on the ropes, 2 new characters show up. These are Keegan and Merrick, 2 of the ghosts that Elias spoke of earlier. Thus begins part 2 of the operation in which Logan and Hesh are tasked with helping the ghosts rescue Ajax, the soldier we saw being interrogated earlier. And this is where my mental image of the ghosts begin to deteriorate a little bit. Their target is an old baseball stadium crawling with enemy forces. The smart thing to do would probably be to go in quiet and use stealth and fancy gadgets to assist them given their small numbers. Instead, the ghosts simply use a hilarious amounts of explosives to bust down the door and go in guns blazing. Another point I'll give this game is the gloomy mood it gives off. Coming off of the original and unremastered version of Modern Warfare 3 for this video, the lighting is done really well, especially when you don't have night vision to rely on. When you put the lighting scale where the game suggests, there are some dark areas only illuminated by small traces of light. The atmosphere this helps build is effective in the moments it's used, but that's unfortunately not as often as I'd like. Eventually, the team finds Ajax, but his interrogation was too brutal and he dies. So by the time Logan, Hesh, and Riley return to Santa Monica, oh, the ghost just totally bounced and left them on their own, by the way, it's under a major assault by the Federation. After a few strafing runs by A-10s, the brothers are able to get back to the command room to find Captain Dad, but he's not there any longer. Instead, what they find is a ghost pretending to be Spider-Man, and they all evacuate before the base is totally overrun. And all the soldiers left behind are never mentioned again, so I'm just going to assume that they all died after their chain of command collapsed and Santa Monica was taken by the Federation. But who wants to care about the dozens of people our characters spent like a decade forging bonds with when we can come to the obvious realization that Elias is the leader of the ghosts? With that out of the way, we get to learn who the field commander of the Federation is, a man named Rourke. Turns out he was a ghost long ago too. Years ago, the Ghost went on a mission to take out one of the Federation's leaders, which naturally is a stealth mission designed specifically for a special ops team, or it's a full-scale invasion. And not only is it a full-scale invasion, but it ends with the flooded capital city that Elias and the others get caught up in.
There he is! There's Yuri!
Good, we'll need him. We're going after Makarov.
But after the target is killed, the crashing helicopter threatens to plunge into the rapids below and Rourke is left behind. Now, years later, he wants revenge. So as far as motivations go, Rourke's is pretty standard, but it's not handled well at all. Part of that comes down to the execution of the scene. With Rourke trapped in the helicopter rubble, Elias is forced to let go to save himself and everyone else. Except that's not really how it happens. The story treats that as what happens, but that's not how the scene actually plays out. Instead of Elias deliberately letting go, it looks like Rourke slips through his grasp and falls into the water below. The button prompt even says you let go, but Elias continues to hold on until Rourke falls. Elias's hands never open to let him go. Rourke slips out as gravity pulls him down. And the game forces you to do this as not hitting the button triggers a fail state and reloads to the last checkpoint. So while Elias drops Rourke, the scene is poorly done and throws a crucial part of the plot into question. I'll discuss how this could have been handled better later, but for now we'll move on to the next mission. The Ghosts are now on a mission to find Rourke and bring him in, but to do that they need intel on where he's going to be. Only one man in the Federation knows, and they've tracked him down to a high-rise in Caracas. This is probably one of the best missions of the game, as it mostly lives up to the promise of how these guys are supposed to operate based on the marketing. From rappelling down the building to silently taking out guards in the dark, the mission actually makes the Ghosts seem like a super sneaky special ops force to be feared. Stealth is the priority here, and as soon as they're compromised, they have to leave as soon as possible or be overrun by a horde of countless enemy soldiers. But it appears that the mission was a setup as Rourke triggers the building to explode to kill the Ghosts. Well, that doesn't work too well. They managed to parachute their way to safety. But if I had a nickel for every time an FPS game from the fall of 2013 featured a collapsing building as part of its marketing and game design,
I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
So while the mission was a setup, the team gets intel on where Rourke is hiding. After being escorted in by a boring vehicle mission, the Ghosts raid the facility and find him just posed up and waiting for them. That's not suspicious at all. But this supposed team of brilliant soldiers evidently don't understand that something is obviously amiss and capture him anyway. So as they fly back to the US, they conduct an interrogation to find out what the Federation is up to. But, and I know this is shocking, the whole thing seems to be a trap.
Wondering why someone would shoot a man before throwing him out of a plane.
Was getting caught part of your plan?
Of course.
Now what's the next step of your master plan?
Crashing this plane with no survivors. Calm down, now's not the time for fear. That comes later. The fire rises.
So with our team stranded and scattered, they must now make their way through a jungle infested with enemy soldiers. Thankfully, Logan has a heartbeat sensor to help him out.
Any unrecognized contacts will show up as white dots.
And I have to call myself out for being dumb here in that I accidentally traveled in a circle while trying to be sneaky. So, oops. But anyway, Logan ends up meeting back up with the rest of the crew and they slink their way past enemies that would make the bad guys in Assassin's Creed laugh. Especially these guys in the tall grass.
Easy, lad. There's too many of them. Let them go. Keep a low profile and hold your fire.
But after making it past most of the guards, the Ghosts are stopped in their tracks by the launch of a missile.
We have a nuclear missile launch! Missile in the air! Missile in the air! Code black! Code black!
Where it's going, we don't know, but that's a mystery for another day. For now, we have to jump off a waterfall to get away from a helicopter chasing us through trees. Hope one of them doesn't fall over and crush us.
Repeat, we have multiple rockets airborne.
But after the Ghosts reach safety, we learn that the President, because apparently there's still a President of the United States, wants us to find out where that missile went. That means we'll probably get to the other best mission in the game, Clockwork. What follows is a pretty decent stealth mission, and what I expected more of in this game. Using enemy uniforms, the team sneaks their way into a Federation base and uses stealth and confusion to achieve their objectives. At every turn, the bad guys constantly fall for the trick because of the hit-and-run tactics the Ghosts are using. They hit an area and quickly move on, meaning no one survives to let slip that people in their own uniforms are the intruders. This is the kind of undercover tactics I would expect from a team known as the Ghosts. They're so sneaky they vanish off the radar almost as soon as they drop into it. It makes it hard for the enemy to get a grasp on what's going on, and before you know it, they're busting their way out and boarding a sub to safety. That sub takes them to Antarctica, where their job is to blow up a major oil pipeline to serve as a diversion for the main Federation naval forces. After some Michael Bay-sized explosions, the team is moving on to hit their primary target, a factory building something important to the Federation military. Before they can hit it though, the Ghosts have to destroy the last cruiser defending the coast. This is one of the more unique missions of the game, as Keegan and Logan spend the entire operation underwater. This is probably the natural evolution to what we saw in Modern Warfare 3 with the Delta Force mission. Instead of simply navigating underwater though, the Ghosts also fight using special underwater guns. While I'm not exactly sure how realistic the underwater guns are, it's a decent change of pace and a point of originality for this game. Between dodging sharks, bad guys, and collapsing debris, Keegan and Logan barely make it out and are able to make it to the factory. When they get there, they discover that the Federation is building their own type of Odin missile system. With this, they'll be able to attack anywhere at any time, and the war will be over within hours. To make sure they can't make any more, the Ghosts blow up the factory and exfil. And I think it's here I want to bring up some problems with the game design compared to Infinity Ward's previous games. I know I've been blowing through the story pretty quick, but now I've got a good amount of examples I can bring up as to why this game overall is a step backwards in many ways. First off is the level gimmicks. It's no secret that the Modern Warfare games each had a gimmick to many of their levels. They were used to keep things fresh and the pacing moving, so each mission really felt new and unique. Sometimes gimmicks would repeat on occasion, but there's plenty of distance between those repeats, so you don't really notice. Ghost really doesn't do this as well. The Clockwork mission is probably one of the best in the game because of the variety it brings. There's stealth, there's sections where you're tearing things up, and then there's also a defense section where you have the autonomy to place gadgets and defense equipment wherever you like. It's satisfying to toss up mines all over the place and watch as enemies blow themselves up. It feels like a larger version of Loose Ends from Modern Warfare 2. A mission that doesn't do this as well, however, is the one where you're blowing up the satellite factory. It has a distinct flaw that many other missions in the game have, and that's the gimmick isn't well utilized. When the Ghosts become compromised, they have to go loud. Merrick throws out smoke and tells the squad to switch to thermal vision. This is the only time that thermal vision comes into play throughout the entire mission. Once the smoke dissipates and the squad moves on, there's no need to switch back to it. The rest of the level then just becomes a typical shoot 'em up. A better level would have given the player their own supply of smoke grenades to throw out where and when they wanted. See all these riot shield guys? Wouldn't it be nice to throw a smoke canister in the middle of them and flank around while they're blind and stab them in the back? Stuff like this happens in Ghosts all the time. In the tower mission, Keegan and Logan use a strobe light to disorient and take out a group of soldiers in the dark. This is the one and only room that tool becomes useful in and isn't brought up again. Wouldn't it have made sense to give the player the option with the other rooms in the building to kill the lights if they wanted and use that to their advantage? Riley even kind of suffers from the same problem, as while he's utilized well in the mission he's in, that's the only mission he's controllable. And after the baseball stadium mission, he's not even commandable anymore and hardly appears. So while it feels like an attempt at variety, most of these added gameplay elements feel underdeveloped and poorly implemented distractions rather than full-on features. Now, to be fair, the other Infinity Ward games have this issue a time or two as well, so it's not uniquely a Ghost issue. However, at least in those games, you can equip the special ability long before it's actually needed and the environment fits the use of that tool. If you want to use the night vision goggles for an entire mission in CoD 4 when they're not needed until the end, you can do that, as the UI shows it right there on the D-pad HUD. The HUD in Ghost, though, doesn't show you these special tools until they need to be used. And then there's the level design. Compared to both CoD 4 and Modern Warfare 2, Ghost is much more linear. With the exception of a few moments, most levels funnel you through small corridors towards your next objectives. Overall, this makes the game feel a little claustrophobic, as there's lots and lots of building interiors to fight through. Now, the older games had linear levels too, but often they'd find excuses to put you in open fields or an area that at least felt more open than it was. The only reason you didn't divert elsewhere is that you were following your squad leader. Even with levels that take place outdoors in Ghosts, you still feel boxed in thanks to the way the environment is built up, whether that be by foliage or buildings or fortifications. You don't get that in the previous games. While Modern Warfare 3 is actually more linear in level design compared to its predecessors, they still manage to disguise that in the way the levels are constructed. In Goalpost, for instance, the level shifts between different streets and in and out of a parking garage. There's even the option to run through a building and fight through it for better cover instead of being out in the open street with the tanks. In Ghost, you constantly feel like you're being forcibly led somewhere by the devs instead of feeling like you're exploring the world naturally. Take Atlas Falls, for instance. This isn't the first time we've seen Infinity Ward tackle an oil platform takedown before, as Modern Warfare 2 featured a similar setting in The Only Easy Day Was Yesterday. But while on that mission you felt the smaller confines of the space you were in, it still let you move around. There were more open decks for you to walk on and take cover behind things, not to mention flanking routes that let you get the drop on bad guys should you have desired. With Atlas Falls, though, the smaller environment feels restrictive and like a pale imitation of Modern Warfare 2's level. Smaller single catwalks make up most of the play space, and for the areas that are open, they feel more like carefully planned out shooting galleries than a realistic deck that has natural cover thanks to the way platforms just happen to be designed. And as I've been alluding to throughout the last few missions, there seems to be some pretty obvious Modern Warfare callbacks that have to be intentional. Aside from the obvious reuse of a setting, we even get the run and jump onto the helicopter rope moment from the Hornet's Nest. This is one of the game's major problems, is that for something that's supposed to be new, it feels too tied to the past. If the game were a spin-off focusing on a new task force led by Price and inspired by Ghost, hence the name, these callbacks would maybe work, but as they are in this game, it just feels like a cheap copycatting and reminding you of better games you could be playing instead. So with the factory destroyed, the Ghosts meet up at a safe house in Vegas, but Rourke beats them there and captures them. To get his revenge on Elias, Rourke starts by shooting Logan. This has no impact on the plot whatsoever, as a moment later Logan is able to break free of his restraints and fight Rourke for the gun. That only ends badly as Rourke uses you to shoot Elias several times. Now mortally wounded, Elias tells Logan that he's proud of him before Rourke finishes him off. And I feel absolutely nothing over this loss. Replaying this, I'm beginning to wonder if maybe I was a little harsh on my treatment of Delta Force in Modern Warfare 3. While I still don't think they were as memorable as characters as the Rangers in Modern Warfare 2, I was still somewhat sad to see them go because I was invested in the world at large and their connection to Captain Price. The Ghosts, however, I feel nothing for. Part of the marketing for this game is they got a big Hollywood writer that won an Oscar to work on the story for this game. Given how the writing turned out, though, I'm wondering if he didn't have much involvement once the initial premise and story beats were laid out, or if his Oscar was one of those freebies that the Academy just throws out every once in a, well, often.
What they really wanted in this game, in Call of Duty Ghosts, is they wanted emotional reality. You know, they wanted these characters to feel real, to feel like real people.
As I mentioned at the top, we don't spend enough time with the Walker family's characters early on to grow attached to them. This is an issue for the game because, as opposed to the Modern Warfare trilogy, this game is at least trying to be character-driven. Part of why many of the characters in the Modern Warfare games being base level worked is because those games were plot-driven. Zakhaev and Al-Assad's villains in CoD 4 are as base level as they come because the focus was on telling a story set in the modern era more than it was actually building characters. For the first third of the game, the SAS don't even have a personal stake in the conflict, it's simply another day at the office. They simply go from mission to mission and do as they're told because that's the job. Even the connection between Price and Zakhaev didn't really make the conflict personal, it just left Price with unfinished business. The motivations aren't deep, but they don't need to be since the focus is on the action more than the actual story. And as the trilogy goes on, it slowly becomes more personal after Shepard's betrayal and the connections with Makarov are revealed. It has a simple start and evolved into something more complex. Ghosts, on the other hand, starts off as being character-driven. That's why they open the game on Elias and his sons, because they're trying to make the game personal and character-driven from the get-go. So putting about the same amount of time into their introductions as we had with Price and the SAS back in 2007 doesn't work as well, because instead of the plot hanging on the result of the mission's outcome, it hangs on the characters. There are several ways this could have been done better, and one of them involves Logan. First of all, Infinity Ward should not have made Logan a silent protagonist in 2013. At this point in time, Treyarch had released 2 games with fully voiced protagonists and character-driven plots. Black Ops told the story of Alex Mason overcoming brainwashing at the hands of the Soviet Union. Black Ops 2 then told the story of Alex's son in the near future of 2025 and flashed back to the perspective of Woods in the 1980s. Both stories having fully voiced protagonists helped make the stories personal and more impactful, and by allowing them to speak during gameplay meant that Treyarch had double the time to let players get attached to them and not just in the short cutscenes. Modern Warfare 3 even featured a semi-voiced protagonist in Yuri, as while he never spoke during the main gameplay, he could be heard in various cutscenes. And then of course the game finishes up with the player as Price.
This is for soap.
So jumping into a character-driven story of Ghosts, Logan should have been a voiced protagonist alongside Hesh, or the 2 characters should have been merged. It's hard to become invested in the relationship between a father and his sons if one of them is mute the entire time. And on top of that, the act for Hesh is just bad. A quick Google later and it turns out he's Brandon Routh, who has lots and lots of Arrowverse credits and was Superman in Superman Returns. So I guess he's a decent enough actor, but his performance here is really questionable. He also has several voice acting credits under his belt besides Ghost, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say he didn't have the best direction given that Stephen Lang, who plays Elias, doesn't turn in the best performance either.
We have to go back. Our dad's down there, and we're not leaving without him.
That's real admirable of you. But your father's not there anymore.
Dad, this whole time you were one of them.
Dad was gone. Nothing could change that. But Logan and I, we were still here. The Federation was still here. Rourke was still here. This war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Goodbye, Dad. I'll never take your place. But I'll die trying to fill it.
So there's no tangible connection between Elias and his sons, which makes that part of the story fall flat. There's no animosity for him lying to them about being a ghost. He's not overly strict or tough on them to help them become the best that they can be, creating rift between them, and we don't spend enough time hearing from them to establish a super close bond. So Elias's death and his final words mean absolutely nothing. Then we come to Rourke. Obviously, the story wants you to believe that Elias willingly let go of Rourke to save himself, besides the fact that we see him never let go and Rourke slip through his fingers. Thanks to this, the whole central conflict between the characters feels off since there's a disconnect between what they're saying and what we saw happen. An easy way to get around this is to have Elias lie to his sons and the other ghosts and say that he couldn't save Rourke, and then at this point we flash back to Rourke's point of view and have him deliberately drop us. It makes Rourke's revenge justified, it makes the relationship between Elias and his sons more complicated, and it makes his death moments later more tragic. Maybe a little cliche? Sure, but it would work better than the conflicting story we got here, and depending on how you want to look at it, you could even say that there's an unreliable narrator in Rourke and still even question if Elias dropped him purposefully at all. Then there's the complaints I have about the ghosts in general. I've said many times now that they seem like nothing special despite being built up. If anything, that just makes every encounter with the enemy come off as boring because you know how well trained the ghosts are. This undermines the entire enemy faction and makes them seem incompetent more than anything. And you could do that, but you need your characters to be showing off some really impressive feats on a consistent basis to add enjoyment into the story, and what we have so far isn't anything that different from what Task Force 141 was capable of. And they at least were able to fall thanks to overwhelming numbers and could be outsmarted. The ghosts, though, are built up to be infallible. No one but Elias dies, well, and Ajax, but we didn't really get to know him, and while they're outsmarted, it often makes them come off as stupid. If this was a point of the story and Keegan and America eventually admit that half of what makes a ghost so effective is the legend, then that would help recontextualize everything and make things more interesting. But we don't get that and are instead forced to carry Riley around like a furry Captain McMillan as the ghosts break free and escape Vegas. So if both Riley and Merrick wounded, it's up to Hesh and Logan to finish the fight, because I guess Keegan decided to skip town after Vegas since he never shows up again. So after fighting on the deck of an aircraft carrier as it's being destroyed, which is another I'd have two nickels moment this game strangely shares with Battlefield 4, we get a tank mission for the first time in Call of Duty history since, I think, World at War. With its fast pace and switching perspectives, this one is honestly a fun one that was a pleasant surprise. So after the ghosts help the tank crew destroy the shield generator so the attack on the second Death Star can commence, destroy the alert center so the attack on the Federation satellites can commence, we get more space battles to claim the space station and get a little payback for the beginning of the game. Meanwhile, back on the ground, Hesh and Logan make their way up to a train to take out Rourke and avenge their father's death. They all end up in the ocean thanks to a strike from the now US-controlled space station, and Hesh holds Rourke in place so Logan can shoot Rourke dead. With him out of the way, Logan saves Hesh and the two brothers watch as the Federation fleet is torn apart by their own weapons, and the game ends. Overall, Ghost is a very flawed game that, oh hey, it has an after credits scene.
Look at what you did. You're good. You'd have been a hell of a ghost. But that's not gonna happen. There ain't gonna be any ghosts. We're gonna destroy him together.
Yes, by some miracle after being shot through the chest, Rourke is still alive despite the fact that we just saw him a few moments earlier during the swim out of the train, and Rourke drags Logan off to turn him into another brainwashed ghost after being impressed with him throughout the game.
Logan!
What a load of bullshit.
So, yeah, that's Ghosts. While I remember enjoying the story when it first came out in 2013, I wasn't really that high on it to begin with, and I'm even less impressed with it now. This game is very emblematic of a studio in the midst of an identity crisis. While it has a few original ideas, none of them are implemented well enough to really be notable and are lost in the shuffle of all the recycled ideas. The shadow of Modern Warfare still hung over the studio and the development of this game so much that the callbacks in the campaign are really distracting, as are the skins that they sold for the multiplayer mode. This shouldn't be surprising given that one of the last notable original Infinity Ward devs left while this game was in production with a tweet that read he left because there was too much pew-pew and not enough new. And the stuff that was new and built up in the marketing wasn't really even properly delivered on. That's a major reason why Riley is still considered to be a meme in the CoD community, as he's the poster good boy for unfulfilled promises. Up until recently, most everyone was perfectly happy to forget about Ghosts until they pulled Rourke into Warzone as a skin. Not only is the story bland, but it's often just bland to play as well. I was actually excited to give it another go when I started, but halfway through I was struggling to even stay with it, which I think sums everything up perfectly. While it has its fans out there, Ghosts is a game that took all the wrong lessons from Infinity Ward's previous games and is part of why I find it so annoying. Modern Warfare started off simple with a good, solid foundation and worked its way into something bigger, but it always had substance to the spectacle. Thanks to this game, this is where the series really became known for being a soulless repeat year after year after year. It's fitting that this is the game that for me started a downward spiral for the series, as it slowly killed my enjoyment for the series as it entered a dark period that strayed far from its roots. While other games at the time like Battlefield 4 helped capture my attention elsewhere, every now and then I couldn't help but wonder when CoD would be good again. But as time went on, it seemed like that answer was so far away, it may have been lost up in the stars.